And my name's actually Dr. Barry. I'm a doctor, not like Peter, but working in hospitals all my life for 50 years. I had a scam perpetrated on me, and I'll name the name. I'm actually the guilty parties. This Perpetual Trustees, Mr. David Devril, CEO, who knew exactly the fraud that was being committed. NAB CBO, Mr. Thornburn, who also got all the information about the fraud being committed upon me. And all this fraud was known and documented, and the documents are in about close to well over 200 boxes. I was actually in the High Court just down the road on one of my cases against the Perpetual Trustees, and they caved in for a settlement, right, which was a very poor settlement on my behalf. But anyway, the lawyers colluded. The lawyers all got paid humongous amounts of money, and that was my fate. But my family came to the rescue because there were evictions, because the loan book from Perpetual and Challenger at the time was purchased by NAB for an estimated $1 billion. So my next statements of my mortgage, unbeknownst to me, was coming from Advantage or NAB, and had the NAB sign on it. So lo and behold, my 3 mortgages, one of my house and 2 of small investment properties. The total original mortgages was 1.65 million. The 1 million on my house and the 650,000 on 2 small apartments. My case was based on Perpetual knowing that they had a fraudulent money laundering account documented inside the account. They were money laundering, and they were breaking the Money Laundering Act. They also were banking large sum third-party checks into strangers' accounts. My 3 checks, one that totaled 1.65 million, were bank checks made out to Perpetual Trustees. So I was under the illusion by the broker, who ended up being charged by ASIC. In one case that they charged, and he went to jail for 5 years. But that didn't help me 1 cent. So they charged the broker, ASIC, took him to the criminal court, and he was jailed for 5 years. But nothing happened to Perpetual, nothing happened to NAB. And he was able to manipulate internally these banks such that he could launder money, which ended up in Hong Kong, and that's all documented in court cases. As I said, I sued Perpetual all the way to the High Court of Australia, whereby the Chief Justice, Justice French, questioned Perpetual, asking them clearly, and it's in the transcript, are you running a Ponzi scheme, Perpetual? And of course, they knew they were failed, but I should not have settled, but that was legal advice I got to settle. The money was laundered through a fraudulent account in the wife's name, right? So there was a wife's account with Perpetual Trustees that he was able to bank the Perpetual Trustees' checks in and immediately remove them. He laundered $25 million of people's money. This was all known very early in the piece by the CEO, David Devril, the ex-CEO, David Devril, because I was a shareholder and I brought it up at the annual general meeting, that this was unconscionable behaviour. And it was ignored. I actually got a letter from the board of Perpetual following that, saying, oh, we're very sorry you didn't get your money, but it wasn't our fault. It wasn't our fault, it was the broker's fault, but it wasn't their fault. They have, the banks and the financial institutions are the custodians of our money and our assets. They are there to look after us, not to steal from us, and to act under the law. Now, the fact that they can break the law is extraordinary and get away with it. And I immediately, of course, reported to the AFP, Austrac, ASIC, everything about them breaking the Financial Transactions Act law pertaining to money laundering by them not reporting known in-house money laundering to these authorities. So they broke a law. They were acting illegally. My 3 fraudulent mortgage documents then transferred to the NAB, not with my knowledge or approval. It just went all of a sudden. I was with Perpetual Trustees, then the next moment I'm with NAB. The $1.65 million mortgages, which were fraudulent and I never received 1 cent of, became $4 million within a matter of about 2 years. And they then wanted to take possession of my home and my small investments. The mortgages should have been returned after the admission in the High Court that they were guilty of fraudulent behaviour, but they didn't return the mortgages, and they held on to them knowing we can get Dr. Lander by eviction. The stolen funds were clearly sent to Hong Kong because that was evidence in the criminal case of ASIC versus the fraudster. His name was Chincotta, and it's thought the funds were used in a drug cartel, and he was connected to it. I wrote to Mr. Thornburn to return my deeds, and they start eviction proceedings. So I don't want to be having me and my family evicted from my home, so I actually raised $4 million to give to him from family members to stop eviction from the family home, and I gave it to Kemp Strang, their lawyers, for NAB and Perpetual. But they still started eviction proceedings after all these forced mortgages were paid off, and they actually evicted the tenants in the apartments, and lo and behold, the sheriff realised after he'd evicted them that there was actually no mortgage, and the apology came from the sheriff but not from the lawyers of the bank. But I wrote to my local member, who happens to be Mr. Malcolm Turnbull, who you know well, outlining the saga with letters from the Board of Perpetual apologising that I never got my mortgage funds and the breach of laws by both NAB and Perpetual. Mr. Turnbull, who we know is now our Prime Minister, writes to me saying, and I have the letter here in front of me, Turnbull MP, on the 15th of the 6th, 2015, which is last year, and it's complaints to FOS and DOCS, FOS documents. FOS, my letters to him was headed FOS Protection of Fraud and Forgery of Banks, Dr. Barry Lander Experience. Malcolm, who I've known for over 30 years, writes, "Dear Barry, thanks for your email. This looks like a police matter. Have you contacted them? Regards, Malcolm." Well, of course I took notice of him, and I went to the police station, and they looked at me and said, "You thought I was crazy. What could they possibly do? Nothing." The police are flabbergasted, saying, "Doctor, how do we arrest NAB or Perpetual?" I did not break any law. Perpetual and NAB broke the law. Taking them to court again was impossible, as I did not have the funds. ASIC, AFP, Austrac, FOS all ignored me by writing letters like it's a civil matter, we can't help you. I want my stolen money back, plus costs and interest. I will state that I settled with the High Court of Australia on legal advice, but they should have given me my deeds back, so they got me on the back. I settled for far less than I lost, as it was only part of what was stolen. I want my family's $4 million back. Everything is documented, and it's documented hugely, and that's basically my story, but it's a much larger story than that. But they owe me $4 million, and I really want it back, and so does my family. And not only that, I'm prepared to give it away to a charity, but not to NAB, not to those guys.